Hi guys, this is Snap, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the build we played in Heist, specifically the Magic Find build we played. It's a Pathfinder build that is supposed to push the absolute limits of quantity and rarity that can be slapped on a single character, and it gets kill credit by using a particular interaction with Southbound, which we'll get into a little bit later. The build is indeed a Pathfinder because of one reason, and that is mainly Divination Distillate, one of the last remaining ways to get every single ounce of quantity and rarity out of your build, and Flask Effect is a very good survival tool. But in order to get a sense of how this character actually functions, we need to first look at the gearing. At a cursory glance, this might look like your standard run-of-the-mill MF carry, but there's a few key differences here. The first being is that it's actually wearing an Ascetic amulet, or Ascetic, however you want to pronounce it. This amulet, if you can pull it off, is actually by far the most amount of quantity and rarity you can get for the item slot. And the truly beautiful thing about this is you're not sacrificing any quantity or rarity if you end up crafting a helmet like this. You see, this amulet forces you to equip one normal item and one magic item in order to get the full effect. The two best slots for doing that is going to be your helmet and your weapon. The helmet works great as a magic item because you can get the same amount of rarity on a prefix and a suffix, and you don't really gain anything from this item being a rare. Additionally, there isn't really a great magic finding helmet, so this is actually a really great fit. And last but not least, you might notice that we're not even using a Wind Ripper on this build. There are a couple challenges associated with using Wind Ripper in an MF scenario, and the first one is obviously achieving a shatter. Wind Ripper is very problematic in these MF scenarios where you have a dedicated MF culler because he can't really obtain the damage necessary in order to be shattering most enemies. Therefore, the effect you get on Wind Ripper is very much lost. Therefore, a better alternative is going to be Centauri's Answer. This gives you most of the quantity that the Wind Ripper does, considering you don't have to be shattering every enemy, but also it allows us to use a normal item in the form of this synthesized imbued wand. Has a nice implicit, gives us some more energy shield, which is great. And since this build isn't doing any damage, it's the perfect fit to have just a normal item here. These two items combined gives us the full effect of the amulet, increasing our MF a little bit. One other thing that this build does is it grabs every single Flask Effect node available on the tree, including Cluster Jewels and Ascendancy. The reason to get Flask Effect, once again, is because of Divination Distillate. This indeed scales with Flask Effect, giving you more quantity and rarity. Additionally, if you have a blue utility flask, you can craft onto it the suffix Order. This suffix gives you 30% rarity during the Flask Effect and also scales with Flask Effect. So the build aims to path to every single Flask Effect node possible on the tree, mainly Arcane Chemistry and Profane Chemistry. It also grabs the Aqueous Accelerant node up by Witch as well. The last two Flask Effect nodes on the tree are by the Ranger start and come in the form of a hybrid node right here that gives you 5% each. Last but not least, the last place to get Flask Effect is going to be from the Spiked Concoction Cluster Jewel. This gives you a buff called Alchemist Genius, and it's a unique named buff which gives you 20% Flask Effect when it's active. The Pathfinder Ascendancy gives us Flask Effect as well, and we even go so far as to take two small nodes instead of a big Ascendancy node so as to maximize the amount of Flask Effect we get. All that Flask Effect together adds up to 109% Flask Effect, as you can see here, over doubling the base effect of the Flask. As with a lot of this other gear, it should be stuff you've seen before, so we're going to try to blow through it really quickly here. Reed's Embrace is just the best MF chest. Sedima's Touch is also the best MF glove. As for the boots, Goldworm is best in slot for magic finding. The rings here are going to be a little bit debated. Some people like Pariahs. We prefer the Venters because we think that uniques hold a lot of value in these maps, and so sacrificing the 5 quantity for the additional rarity is a trade-off we see as being necessary. The Venters we have on are particularly garbage. You can definitely squeeze out a little more rarity and resistances out of these ones, although the life roll is a little bit worthless. Last but not least is the String of Servitude with a perfect quantity roll, and the next question we need to ask ourselves is how the hell do we keep this character alive in a T19 Delirium map? And the answer is none other than voices. Bet you saw that one coming. Here you can see that this particular build uses 3 voices. We opted for 5 passives, although I suppose you could use any number of passives. You basically only need one medium cluster jewel that is of the Spiked Concoction, which we mentioned before, and the rest of these are going to be 2 and or 3 passive energy from knots, which is going to be the best way to increase your ES pool on a character like this. Basically, every single voices is just 2 passive energy shield energy from Knot. The tree should be pretty straightforward, but there's a few things to mention here. One of them is to grab Resolute Technique, because obviously on a build like this, our accuracy is going to be absolute garbage, and we want to make sure that we're hitting absolutely everything. The other one is to try to fit in a Watcher's Eye. This is a super great way to get a lot of survivability out of this build. We got a pretty sick Watcher's Eye. This one in particular gives you mana as extra energy shield and also gives you energy shield while you hit stuff. It's definitely saved us quite a bit, although getting just one of these mods can be a real game changer. danger. The other thing is going to be this Elegant Hubris jewel. For those who aren't aware, Elegant Hubris can roll a node called Discerning Taste. This gives you 40% increased rarity of items found. Just know that if you're trying to divine for this, it is extremely difficult. We spent around 300 divines and only saw a single roll with 2 of these rolls for Discerning Taste, but it was way too many passives to grab, so we ended up just opting for this simple one, which is 3 points for 40% rarity. You do have a lot of options for this particular jewel socket. This one is a great one that we are already using. Additionally, you can utilize these 2 that are at the Scion wheel. Obviously, you could flip it with this Watcher's Eye socket. Last but not least, you could also put it right here where the Conqueror's Potency is. You got to be really careful in order to replace this particular jewel socket. It's going to need to beat the Flask Effect that you get from Profane Chemistry, so it's at least going to have to be 2 rarity rolls to be even worth considering using. All in all of that quantity and all of that rarity adds up to the following: grand total of 137 quant and 589 rarity. So that's all great. We got all the quantity and all of the Flask Effect and all of the rarity. Everything's ready to go. The question is, how do you kill monsters with all of this equipped? The answer is you kind of don't. You're basically just getting the last hit on it using a clever interaction with an item called Southbound. Essentially, the way it works is you equip these pair of gloves on a character who is doing the majority of the damage. The damage dealer can be really any skill, anything that is not a dot build, as the main source of damage needs to be a hit. So chaos dots are out of the question, including bleed dots. It has to be a hit. We think the skill of choice is Penance Brand for a number of reasons. Basically, all you need to do is pair these gloves with somebody who can carry a 6-man party, and then also in your main damage links, equip the support skill gem Elemental Focus. Elemental Focus makes it so you can't apply any ailments. That includes freezing, and since you cannot freeze enemies, you can't kill them. This effectively leaves the mobs at 1 HP, which makes it really easy for the culler, this Pathfinder, to collect all the kills with all of its juicy quantity and rarity. There is a couple logistical challenges with managing lag, as well as how do you get the culler to hit every mob without slowing down the map significantly. Because if you're slowing down the map significantly just to get that little boost of quantity, then it really wouldn't be worth running a culling setup in the first place. And the way we achieve that coverage is through a skill with a lot of coverage. It has innate pierce. Additionally, we pair this with some clever ascendancy choices to provide the most amount of coverage possible that a build can get for very little investment. And I'm sure you noticed from the footage just now that that skill is indeed Kinetic Bolt. Kinetic Bolt is great for a few reasons, mainly that it is a wand skill. Given that we're using a white wand, it seems like a good choice here. Additionally, the projectiles have innate pierce, and given the hyper density of 5-orb delirium maps, this is kind of something you need to be able to hit everything. And for those who aren't super familiar with Kinetic Bolt, each time you add a fork to the gem, it does an additional zigzag thing, increasing the coverage and the distance that the skill hits. It's just a crazy skill for coverage all around, and doesn't require a ton of investment. If you can manage to get it, you can also get a blue helmet with a Kinetic Bolt enchant. However, we didn't land it, we just got a Frostbolt enchant. The best enchant you can get here is not +1 fork, but +2 fork, which is an absolute crazy amount of coverage to the character. But good luck finding a perfect rarity helmet with that enchant. Additionally, item rarity here should be pretty obvious, and some of you may be asking, why the hell do you have poison and lesser poison in links here? Obviously, this doesn't increase the coverage at all, but in fact it does. This is probably the least used ascendancy node on Pathfinder, but the thing that enables the coverage on this build is Nature's Reprisal. It makes it so that when you kill a poison enemy during any Flask Effect, nearby enemies are poisoned. This is essentially poison proliferation, which adds an insane amount of coverage to the skill. So things that aren't getting hit by every single beam of Kinetic Bolt are almost always going to be poisoned by this node if nearby things are dying. Additionally, the poison is a dot that lasts a while. So if you're in a situation where the culler is attacking stuff before the carry has had a chance to attack it, the poison is going to be already applied. Therefore, when the DPS arrives to come do damage to the monsters, because the poison's already applied, the monsters will die afterwards, making it so that the culler doesn't have to constantly attack. He just has to basically attack everything once, apply the poison, let the poison proliferate, and basically everything is dead. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight on how everything comes together. There are a few other things to mention here, and that is regarding the flask setup for this particular build. Now, obviously, you're going to be using Divination Distillate and some sort of utility flask with the Rarity Craft. Additionally, you're going to have to use Soul Catcher in order to keep up your Divination Distillate. You see, Divination Distillate is a hybrid flask, and if at any point during the Flask Effect, your life and mana go to full, the flask will stop, which is obviously very bad. Soul Catcher, however, has a line that reads, "Cannot gain mana during Flask Effect." This allows you to spend a little bit of mana, and then you quickly press your Soul Catcher. This makes it so you can't recover that mana, and then afterwards, you push Divination Distillate, and the Divination Distillate will be active for the full duration because you can't gain any mana during the entire Flask Effect. This brings along its own issues, however. Obviously, if you can't gain mana during your Flask Effect, how are you going to be able to cast a skill? And from here, you really have 3 options. The first thing you might think is to change one of our gem links to blood magic. Because you're not using mana, you're going to be able to spend life, right? Well, that's a problem because we're CI, so this really isn't an option. The second option is to use Vol Clarity. Vol Clarity gives you no mana cost during the duration of the skill. However, this is a little bit problematic because there's going to be inevitable downtime at the end of the Vol skill, and if you're not able to attack, that can lead to disasters. The best solution is to use Lavianjas. This is a flask that makes it so your skills have no mana cost during the Flask Effect, and you actually don't recover any mana from the mana flask because you're using a soul catcher. You also do have this note on the tree, Fasting, which gives you a little bit of flash charges, which helps keep up these high cost flasks. So with these 4 mandatory flasks out of the way, the last one is really choice. We, however, go with Rumi's Concoction because of the absurd amount of Flask Effect that we have here. It puts our block and spell block up to 66 and 28% respectively. There are a couple other options here you can tinker with, most notably Taste of Hate, if you want to convert some of that physical damage you're taking into elemental damage, but that's really the only other option you have here. And I think we prioritize the block a little bit more. One other thing to note here on the Soul Catcher is since we do have such an insane amount of Flask Effect, the Soul Gain Prevention mod is actually getting affected by that, and it gives you an extremely high uptime on 2 very important Vol auras, mainly Vol Grace and Vol Discipline. You can have close to 100% uptime on your Vol Discipline, which is a really, really great defensive layer for most of the party. In regards to leveling, there isn't really a great way to get this build from A to B. Basically, you can play just a normal carry build with a moderate amount of MF. We usually stick to Rain of Arrows or Ice Shot, just playing a typical generic bow build and really take your pick. And then right as we're about to start hopping into those T16 5-orb Delirium map, and we have all of the other gear assembled, we transition all of these builds at the same time. Yeah, I think that about sums up most of the MF build that we've been running. I know there's going to be a lot of substantial balance changes in the next patch, but hopefully this gives you an idea of like the thought process behind these sort of things. And honestly, I don't expect a lot of this to change. There are nerfs here and there, but the majority of these builds are going to remain the same, unless we see some sweeping changes to the way party quant is calculated. But I don't envision that changing anytime soon. Anyways, next up, we're probably going to be doing a video on the Penance Brand carry build that we've been doing, or most likely the disc bot that has replaced Mana Guardian since Cluster Jewels came out. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to respond to as many people as I can. Hopefully you guys learned a few things from this video. And once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.